everyone. Welcome to my presentation, and I hope that you're enjoying LlewellynCon. My name is Mark Green, and I'm the author, most recently, of Round We Dance Creating Meaning Through Seasonal Rituals. Um, I am a longtime participant in the North American pagan community. I've been involved since the mid 80s, and I have known and circled with many of the prominent names in our movement over time. I've presented throughout the country, and I've published two books on non-theist naturalistic paganism, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Um, and I'm the initiator of a non-theist naturalistic pagan path called Paganism, which today has thousands of practitioners. Professionally, I work in environmental advocacy and wildlands protection, so it's meaningful work to me and all a part of my spirituality in relation to the earth. So, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come and see um, what I have to say about stuff. I'd like to start with a content warning, which is that given Llewellyn's general audience, and I don't know how this applies to every individual one of you because we're all different, this presentation may challenge your thinking and beliefs. Um, I ask you to bear with me and to be open to the ideas here. My point is not to offend anyone, but it's to stimulate and discussion. So, keeping that in mind, I'd like to start by asking you kind of a rhetorical question and then inviting you into a thought experiment. And the question is this: what is paganism for? Why are we pagans? Why do we do that? Really, what is the point of it? What does it do for us? It's obviously a choice we've each made, since most people aren't. So, why are we pagans? So sit with that for a minute. We're going to come back to these later on, but just just sit with that. Why exactly do we do this stuff? And then here's the thought experiment. What if the nature of the universe is, as science and the available evidence appear to indicate, naturalistic? In other words, there's nothing supernatural, there are no invisible beings, there is no magic, there's just the material world operating unconsciously according to the laws of physics. What if that is really all there is? Just as a thought experiment. So let's let those questions sit for a while. We'll come back to them, as I said. But that sort of sets the table for the conversation that I'm hoping to have today. So let me now talk a bit about what I really appreciate about modern paganism. First and foremost, for me, and what attracted me to paganism in the first place, because I'm a lifelong atheist, I've never believed in the supernatural. But when I was exposed to paganism when I was in my mid 20s, I was fascinated because of the resacralization of the world. The 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 idea of reestablishing a sacred relationship between humanity and the earth, such that we have a sense of reciprocal responsibilities to one another and a sense of reverence for one another. So that's the number one thing that I really appreciate about modern paganism. The next is the values, the inclusiveness, the kindness, the growth orientation, the community, the acceptance of death, the affirmation of each unique person, as opposed to thinking of people as sinners and having arbitrary rules limiting how we can be and how we can express our true natures. Really a big believer in the pagan values as expressed in modern paganism by and large. I mean, there are exceptions. You know, we have a Nazi problem, particularly in the Norse sector. And we all know it, and we fight against it. But there is an issue there with hard right wing, bigoted kinds of belief. But overall, we're inclusive, we're kind, we're community oriented, we're growth oriented, and we seek to be the the highest self we can be, and that is very important, very important to me. Next is the resistance to the overculture. That by and large, paganism is anti-capitalistic and it's anti-colonialistic. So um, it rages against the machine, and I find that very important. Um, the uh, the machine is destroying the earth and it's making people miserable, and we need to resist it. And that is a lot of what I've devoted my life to. Actually, is fighting that. You'll have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to cough. I'm fighting off a cold. Thank you. Um, I love that we live our lives for this world as opposed to an afterlife. This beautiful, magnificent, horrific, complex, baffling, paradoxical world. We live for this amazing journey that we're given through the most astronomical of odds against. We are able to live our lives to the fullest through the lens of paganism. And as a part of that, our appreciation for aesthetic beauty and for pleasure and for joy and for wonder, and the fact that we cultivate psychological skills and meaningful experiences through ritual making. I love all of these things about modern paganism, and they are why I self identify as a pagan and have now for 37 years. There are, however, some things that I don't appreciate so much, and I'm going to list those as well. The first and foremost, honestly, is when paradigms are imported into modern paganism from the authoritarian monotheisms like Christianity. So, for example, the idea of the importance of faith, like that you have to be a believer in order to be a pagan, that's a recent thing. That only arose in the 1990s, in my experience. And it came from lots of refugees from Christianity flooding into paganism and bringing their paradigms with them. I don't think you have to believe in anything in order to be a pagan other than the value set. My position. I don't appreciate cultural appropriation from marginalized and oppressed people. It's wrong. And I think, especially early in the modern pagan movement, there was a lot of that cultural appropriation, and it really wasn't correct. And some people are still doubling down on saying that it's okay. I don't think it's okay. So I don't appreciate that. I particularly online, I don't appreciate the gatekeeping and the accusations and finger pointing over authenticity, who's a real pagan and who's not. Um, we don't have a pope who can tell us who's a real pagan and who's not. So to me, that just seems like a crashing waste of time. And then finally, this one, and this is the one that I really want to focus on today, the credulity in pseudosciences, and in some cases in outright fantasies, and the willful avoidance of critical thinking to protect irrational belief is something that I think is really problematic. I think that's the worst one in my opinion, because in our community, in my experience, your experience may be different. In my experience, it is considered rude to ask a person in the pagan community what evidence they have for believing something. Why do you believe that? Okay, Odin told me something. Okay, why did you believe that? What evidence did you have? That's a rude question in the pagan community, and I don't think it should be. I think we should be able to ask hard questions about why we believe stuff. So I go back to what my paganism is for, and a lot of answers are for me, right? That initial question, what's paganism for? A lot of my answers are for me. Empowerment, liberation, pleasure, joy, wonder, community. But what I value about paganism isn't only for me, it's also for the world. It's a movement for positive change, in my opinion. I'm a very political person, I'm the first to grant it. I believe that paganism is an effort to transform the society in a positive direction. So, as a social movement, as a growing presence in our society, because paganism's growing fast, how can we be helpful? How can we advance the values that we stand on? And my answer to that question is by modeling paganism that thinks as well as dances, feels, and loves. I'm going to say that again. By modeling paganism that thinks as well as dances and feels and loves. Technology and science and issues best understood through them, like the environmental crises that we face, now define our society and our world. Here's an example. This conference right now relies on technologies that were created through science and logic. No magic was involved at any point. Unfortunately, failing critical thinking and growing hostility to expertise and credulity in conspiracy theories and outright falsehoods also now define our society. And they are painfully rife in our community. This causes real harm. Probably 300,000 Americans died because they believed nonsense about COVID vaccinations. And let's not even get started about climate change denial or conspiracy theories. If we are to be here for a better future, we need to help the growing ignorance movement to change. We need to encourage not only the joy and the celebration and the wonder and the enchantment of paganism, but the application of critical thinking. Fortunately, turning the page, fortunately, more and more paganism is changing. For one thing, there are growing voices for inclusiveness and DEIB, which is essential. It is absolutely essential that marginalized voices be raised and that we be as inclusive as we possibly can be as a movement. There is movement away from cultural appropriation and Eurocentrism. And finally, there is a rising voice of science-grounded and skeptical naturalistic pagans. With the skyrocketing popularity of witchy ideas and practices and the steady decline of Christianity, mindfulness practices, rituals, and other pagan activities are propagating throughout Western culture. The process of societal transformation is already taking place. Give it a couple of generations, and we are going to be a significantly minority Christian society with people seeking their spiritual practices elsewhere. So let's go back to that initial question again. What does our paganism do for us? Why do we practice it? I would say answers for like growth and wisdom and self-esteem and meaning and sense of place in the world and connection and awe and wonder and joy and community. Those are not only the things that paganism can do for us, they are the gifts we can offer to our society, which are so radically different than the frowny, control-oriented monotheisms. They're so much more beautiful than what can be offered by, the kind of monotheistic death cults that are all about attaining an afterlife of joy. And then there's the thought experiment. If the universe is, as the evidence seems to indicate, simply an unconscious physical process, does that make our need for all those things that paganism does for us go away? Well, of course not. Of course not. We still need all those things because we're human, right? We need community and we need joy and we need a sense of place. And we need a sense of meaning. We need self esteem. All the things that paganism is really good at creating. And we can have those things. That's my point. My point with all of this is that we can have those things without subscribing to beliefs that aren't supported by evidence. We can do that. And the kind of paganism that I practice is exactly that. It is a paganism in which my cosmology is the same as what modern science tells me. It tells me that the universe is a physical process unfolding according to physical laws, and that's it. And I still find so much joy, so much wonder, so much affirmation, so much meaning in that natural world and in the community of people who come together to celebrate it and one another, that I don't feel that I lose anything by not believing in gods or spirits or an afterlife or magic. I don't need those things in order to experience the wonderful things that paganism can provide to me. So the challenge before us, in my opinion, if we want paganism to be a force for good going forward, is to meet those human needs while addressing the credulity problem that's causing such harm in the world. And fortunately, there is a growing population of skeptical witches, religious naturalists, naturalistic pagans, atheopagans, more and more self identified pagans and witches understand their practices and their gods, if they have them, as metaphorical and psychological in nature, rather than magical or supernatural. And this is beneficial because they aren't perpetuating pseudoscience. Rather, they're recognizing that things that feel good and are meaningful and are psychologically impactful are valuable in their own right. So I propose that naturalistic paganism is a path forward for us. It's the paganism of the verifiably real. Now, maybe there's a whole other dimension to the universe which is supernatural. I haven't seen credible evidence for it, but maybe that's so. To me, that doesn't even really matter. I'm so focused on the actual material universe and how marvelous and amazing and drop dead gorgeous it is that I don't need that supernatural dimension in order for me to feel deeply spiritually moved. So, without demanding that we suspend our reason when it comes to what we believe, we can be a growing social force for the pagan values we celebrate. The inclusiveness, the kindness, the earth caring, the pleasure positivity, the focus on living life well. We can have all the fun stuff, the witchy aesthetic and the rituals and the celebrations. And we can do that while still applying critical thinking and being positive examples and understanding the world as it most likely is. Naturalistic paganism is a both and approach that celebrates both reason and creativity, art and science. So I invite you to look into it. Read either of my books on the subject. My latest is Round We Dance, Creating Meaning Through Spiritual Rituals, which came out from Llewellyn earlier this year. Or you could go to the website of the nonprofit Atheopagan Society, which is theapsociety.org, and learn a lot more about one particular path of pagan, naturalistic paganism. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks today and your, taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate that. And I'm happy to answer questions. Are there, you can put questions in the chat. I can read the chat now. My notes aren't covering it anymore. Oh, you're so kind. People are just being so kind. So, do people have any questions? Is there anything that I can explain further, or you're interested in what I like about paganism best? How do I personally recharge my energy? The the most rapid way that I personally recharge my energy is to eat something grounding and take a shower. To be honest, very practical. Eat something like something that's got some carbs in it, really going to put a good base in my stomach, and then take a shower. And that kind of refreshes me and enables me to go out and meet what I have to meet. I don't think I could generalize about what Native American people believe enough. There are hundreds of different language groups that lived in the Americas, and I can't really try to generalize about all of those. How do I define cultural appropriation? Um, I define cultural appropriation as taking on symbols or mythologies of cultures that haven't invited, of marginalized and oppressed cultures that haven't invited you in. One of the things about Western colonialism is that it tends to think that it can take whatever it finds. That it's entitled to whatever it can either seize or buy. That's not right. Um, it isn't. Let's take, for example, the Hopi Puebloan people, for example. They have a very complex, mysterious, and secret spiritual world that they live in. Using a Hopi kachina in my rituals? No way. That's totally wrong. Excuse me. Um, I wouldn't feel that that was an appropriate thing for me to do. There was something I said, paganism without subscribing to, well, let me fill it in again. I'm not sure that I'll say the same things, but paganism without subscribing to what isn't consistent with the available evidence. It's a paganism of the verifiably real. Yes, I say that often. I think some pagan deities are representative of the natural world. I think others, like there are war deities, for example, that are definitely about human stuff. Yes, I celebrate the natural world and I find that everything in it is beautiful. Beautiful. If someone has a non evidence based belief that comforts them and doesn't harm anyone, I'm more apt not to ask pointed questions about that, um, because there's no harm being done. Excuse me. This cough is really rough. Um, but um, the rise of people unquestionably accepting stuff that has no basis in reality is a real issue in our society. And so I think getting in the habit of asking those questions is a good thing to do. What I base my rituals on. I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you explain a little more about what you mean there? Well, Anne, let me answer your question. There are Irish people who feel that Irish traditions have been heavily appropriated by modern paganism because Gardner and and Kelly and other people like that just kind of seized on Irish stuff and made it their own. Um, some argue that Irish culture is not closed. So if it's not closed, then it's not cultural appropriation. You have to make your own moral judgment about that. Yes, I celebrate the wheel of the year, the equinoxes and solstices, and the midpoints in between. I define for myself what those mean for me. You have to be careful about the idea that it's your ancestry because that seems to suggest that access to spirituality is based on bloodline. And that's a very right wing, dangerous kind of perspective. That's the kind of perspective that says that black people can't practice Norse paganism because they're black. And I disagree with that very strongly. Celtic pagan beliefs have a common origin point. Well, all humanity has a common origin point at some point, right? I mean, what I find most moving when I think about the founding points of human religion, I go back to cave paintings and figurines and stuff like that. I go back 45, 50,000 years. That's the stuff that I'm most fascinated with. I'm much less interested in stuff during the historical period. That's true, but they shouldn't have to have that in order to be practitioners of Norse paganism. That's my point. um, I think what you feel that moves you is a valuable indicator. I also think that, I mean, I find myself very moved by the Diné way of life as I understand it, the Navajo way of life. And I have no right to practice any of it, and I would never consider doing any of the things that I know about that I know about Diné culture. Well, Mary, I would agree that science reveals things to us that appear to be magical in terms of being fascinating and wondrous, but they aren't magical in terms of supernatural power. They aren't they aren't drawing for mysterious undetectable forces into them. They're just doing the things that they do in order for the universe to evolve. Chakras and paganism. I don't believe in chakras. Ah, any author recommendations? Carl Sagan, great. And Sasha Sagan's book, for small creatures such as we, his daughter's book about rituals. Um, yes, I base rituals on science. I do, but I also base them on what feels good, what feels meaningful to me. I understand the wheel of the year as a cycle of nature going through its annual dances, and I recognize each station along the way as an important place. I consider that also metaphorical to a human life. So I consider birth to be at the winter solstice and old age to be at harvest, the autumnal equinox, and then death at Hallows or Halloween or Samhain or whatever you call it. I don't use any of the Celtic names in my practice because I don't really relate to that tradition. Um, so I've stripped all of the other cultures out of my practice. I just practice based on what's happening in the natural world around me. Yes, that's exactly right, Philip. I really agree with that. Um, because if you talk to Irish people, they'll tell you that Irish Americans aren't Irish, and they kind of laugh about it. And there are a lot of people who are uh, who are very adamant about their Irish ancestry in the United States. And Irish people are like, "You're not Irish. Your people have been in the U.S. for 4 generations. You don't remember anything." Um, so everybody has opinions, right? You have to make your own moral judgment about whether you think you're appropriating or not. Other questions? Great question. Tarot and divination. I read tarot. I find it to be a very valuable, complex set of symbols that helps me to get in touch with my subconscious. It's not fortune telling, it doesn't tell the future. But what it can do is it can help me to unearth stuff about my understanding of a given situation that I otherwise wouldn't have seen. And I think that's true of divination systems generally. I like tarot because I like tarot because it's very complex, it's rich with many symbols. But yes, it would work with palmistry, it would work with any of those. Yes, exactly, Renee. Yes, I do view pagan deities as simply archetypes created by humans. I'm sorry you find my beliefs bleak. I'm filled with joy from them. I don't see credible evidence that ESP and telepathy happen. If credible evidence comes along, I'll change my mind. That's the great thing about a scientific worldview. You're always open to new information. So while I don't believe in gods because I don't see credible evidence for them, if new evidence comes along that says, hey, these gods are real, I'll change my perspective. I'm not ideological about that. I'm just inquisitive and I use critical thinking. One more question. Thank you, Llewellyn Books. No, I did not study Jung, actually. I don't find Jung all that compelling or scientific. Very philosophical, but not very scientific. Um, I do see um, I do see gods as ideas that humans have created, personalities that they've used to put on physical and universal experiences because humans relate to other humans much better than we do to anybody else. Okay, so thank you all very much for coming. I hope that I've stimulated your thinking, and I really appreciate your being here and being willing to listen to what I have to say. So much, warm feelings towards you, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your